patriots who are here in this room today, all of us want to say thank you. It's always amazing to stand in front of this many people who support all of our local veterans. Thank you very much for coming out. To the greatest generation who sits here before us, it's always amazing to be in your presence. To our Korean War veterans who are here, you often hear that the Korean War was the forgotten war, but I will tell you something in Rochester, your service to our country is not forgotten. To the Vietnam veterans who are here in attendance today, welcome home. And to the veterans who are here who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, we thank you for the very freedom and security that we enjoy today. We're deeply honored and quite humbled to stand before you this afternoon as we pay tribute to a very special group of Americans, Rochester's veterans who served during World War II and the Korean War. I can think of no place as an American citizen and a fellow veteran that I would rather be here this morning and early afternoon than with you. On this day, we are here in Rochester and we attempt, as best we can, to ensure the debt that we owe to these men and women in front of us is properly honored. We're all here today, and we are all free today, because for nearly 2.5 centuries, whenever freedom has been threatened, gallant men and women, these men and women, answered the call. From all branches of the armed forces, they risked, and their comrades sometimes gave their lives in defense of our nation and in support of all of us. John F. Kennedy once said, "A nation reveals itself not only by the men it produces, but by the men it honors, the men it remembers." We as a community remember what you did on distant battlefields so many years ago, in Normandy and in Incheon. We also remember the sacrifices that your families made in supporting you here on the home front. While no action can ever begin to repay those of you for what you've done for our nation, Honor Flight Rochester is so very proud as a community to fly you, our heroes, to Washington so that you can visit and reflect together at the memorials that were built in your honor. I rarely take the liberty of speaking for a group, but I'll tell you something I can say with a good deal of confidence today, that everyone here to support you shares the same emotions. Our hearts are filled with gratitude, with brotherhood, with appreciation, and with love. If over the years we have failed to properly show you what's in our hearts, hopefully today shows you what we truly feel. They asked me to speak here today briefly, and I will keep it brief. I've flown down, and I know what a long day that it is. To go to Washington, as a guardian. On a personal note, flying to Washington as a guardian was one of the most rewarding experiences of my entire life. I've had the good fortune of being able to study your generation in college, and I've taught courses at the college level where young students study the wars that you fought in. But the greatest education I've ever gotten was not in the classroom, as not with my students. It was spending time with you on Honor Flight, being able to hear your stories as you bear witness to not only what you did, but what your comrades did. And I thank you for that opportunity. I'll tell you what I think should be talked about just briefly, and the county executive hit on this just a little bit, is this idea of generational connections. I think it's one of the most powerful things with Honor Flight. This ability to take those of you who fought in our nation's greatest wars so many years ago and to connect you to younger veterans and to younger American citizens. There's two distinct groups of guardians who are here in this room. There are those who are family members who are traveling with parents and with grandparents, and that's a special connection. Interestingly, when you fly and when you come back, often the guardian who's a family member will say exactly the same thing. They told me more about their service in the past 24 hours than I've heard in the last 60 or 70 years. Those memorials in Washington, they're places of memory. And when they share together with their family and with their former comrades, often that provides a safe place to open up about some of the things that they experienced. There's another group of guardians, and that's the group that I fall in. I met the gentleman, Bob Gent, that I took down the Wednesday before we flew. He was kind enough to invite me into his home, to make me a cup of coffee, to share his experiences with me, to include showing me a scrapbook of pictures from his service in the South Pacific. 1944 and 1945, including an amazing photo that he took off the bow of the destroyer that he served on, showing the USS Missouri and the honor guard on board when the Japanese surrendered in August. Truly emotional. He had tears in his eyes as he showed me that photo because he was proud of his service and the service that he and his comrades gave to our nation. Many of you who are in the room have not flown to Washington, so I do want to speak just briefly about what the experience is. I could talk for hours about this because it's truly emotional, as many of you have seen. But I just want to give you just a little bit of a highlight of what it is like to be a Guardian going down. Standing behind that wheelchair and pushing an American hero in Washington is a great honor. It provides an amazing advantage to see the experience that each of you has. Right from when you land in BWI Airport, the emotion begins. The support that is given by uniformed service members in Washington, Baltimore area, by the staff at the airport there, and by the Patriot Guard riders, who are just outstanding, really brings tears to just about everyone's eyes. To stand behind you and to see someone extend their hand and say a heartfelt thank you is quite powerful indeed. To board a bus, to roll into Washington, that's as close as I've ever felt to being in an entourage with a bunch of rock stars, personally. If you saw these guys on their Harleys with the flags waving off the back, cutting off 4 lanes of traffic on a heavy morning, it's really, really something to see. And all of us thank the Patriot Guard riders for what they do here at the homecoming and what they do in Baltimore for us. As you mentioned, the mail call on the plane, that connection of generations, to have a number of young American citizens to write personal letters to those of you who have served. And you can tell by their words that are in those letters that they put a good deal of thought and emotion behind that. The trip into D.C. and going to these memorials, which were built far too late in your honor, is incredibly powerful. I want to share with you my trip down to Washington and my trip to the World War II Memorial. The veteran that I was with, I was pushing him in his wheelchair. We stopped and read a few of the quotes together from Eisenhower and MacArthur and some of the great leaders from that area. It was a beautiful morning, much like today. And there was a family about my age who came over with their 2 young children, probably 10 years old, give or take. And he came over and he shook Bob's hand and he said, I wonder if you would do me the honor of allowing me to introduce my children to an American hero. He did. He introduced his family. And his children looked in his eyes and they said, thank you for your service. Appreciate what you have done for all of us. I took their picture together there at the memorial. And Bob had tears in his eyes when they walked away. He said that's one of the kindest things that anyone has ever done for me. Very powerful. And this is what happens day after day at that memorial. Americans of other generations, they respect what it is that you did for all of us. And hopefully, by taking members of this generation to those memorials, you can feel that love and appreciation. As someone who has had the privilege to teach about these wars, to talk about their significance, I like to think I know what I'm talking about in the classroom. I also know the more I study the wars that you fought in, the less I can really understand them. The size and the scale and magnitude of what you did, the significance of what you did, saving the world. Quite powerful. I want to tell you about the greatest history lesson I ever saw. The mission that we had an Iwo Jima Marine on board, and we were at the Marine Corps Memorial in Arlington. And it just so happened that there was that moment for a generational connection. There was a middle school class from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Just happened to be around this time of the year on their end of the year field trip. And their teacher came over and introduced herself to several of the veterans that we had. She said that they had been studying the war, and she came to find out that this gentleman had been at Iwo Jima. And she said, you know something, we were just talking about that very battle and talking about the war that you fought in just the other day. And he said, I'd love to talk to your students, if I could, for just a few minutes. So here at the Marine Corps Memorial, a middle school class took a knee. And this gentleman who was there explained what it was like to be in Iwo Jima on day 3 most valorous day in the history of the United States Marine Corps. And I will tell you, quite a few of those students had tears in their eyes. Their teacher had tears in her eyes, and I had tears in my eyes listening to him. Incredibly powerful to see something like that. Those memorials are places of memory. They bring back a lot of emotions, not only for the veterans who served in those wars, but for those of us who escort them there as well. After you leave the World War II Memorial, the Korean Memorial, and those on that side of the river, we go across over into Arlington to see the changing of the guard at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. And for anyone who has been there, you know that that is military precision at its finest. Seeing that sergeant come out and relieve the guard makes me think that I was quite a poor soldier, because I know I never had that degree of military bearing, and my uniform never looked nearly that perfect. Nothing that is done there is done on accident. Everything is perfection. 21 steps, facing movement, stand for 21 seconds, and so on. So when all of you are there lined up, they can't stop and shake your hands. They can't say thank you for your service. But what they can do is have a little bit of an accident. I don't know if it happened on your trip, but as they go by, they can't stop and say hello to you and thank you for the very freedom that they have today. They have taps on their shoes, and they can give them a good long scuff. And that's for you. And they do that because they appreciate the service that you have given, and they are so very proud, as am I, to be a member of the same military that each of you served in. Here's the interesting part. Before you fly down there, you think for sure the most powerful and most significant piece of this trip is to get you, to that memorial, to take a former Navy Seabee and maybe be able to stop in Arlington on the way in and take you to the Seabee Memorial. That is powerful. But the most powerful piece is this homecoming, in this airport, in this community. Right? Walking through upstairs. There's a lot of tears down in Washington, but I think there's just as many that are here today. And that's because many of you certainly didn't get the homecoming that you deserved. World War II veterans, everyone thinks that they got a ticker tape parade in New York City, and that is not the case. Many of you served on active duty well into 45, well into 1946, and the parades and the bands were gone by the time you came home. Certainly for those of you who served in Korea, you didn't get that reception that you deserved. And hopefully today, you felt that for one day, in this community, we came together and we said thank you. In closing, each of the veterans in this room and in this nation is part of an unbroken chain of men and women who have served this country with honor and with distinction. You are so incredibly humble, which has always amazed me. You're so proud of your service. And you are the patriots that we all look up to. Each of you served a cause so much greater than yourself in defense of our nation. You took an oath, you lived by a code, and you stood ready in the times of darkest peril to defend all of us. God, keep us ever grateful for your service. Thank you.